Thank you. I've been... Paul Pape Designs. Thank you very much for telling. And now I've got the sound coming out of another thing as well. Oh dear. I very rarely do that. But I've done it tonight, haven't I? Yeah. Oh, an insane hello, welcome. Yeah, well, I've been broadcasting for an hour with obviously no sound. Dear. Oh, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome, thank you for the raid. And insane as well. Yes, you know, I've got. It's lit up. The mic thing. I've got a stream deck here, but it's lit up. It's lit green or red. Red is muted, green is live, and I've looked at it a few times tonight, and I still haven't seen it. Okay, so what am I working on tonight? Pyrography, wood burning, as some people call it, but there's no burning involved. In fact, nothing gets hot enough to actually burn. This is an old shed. In fact, I'll show you the reference picture that I'm working from. It's just under the glass. So that's what it is. It's an old shed. It's a sentimental shed. This shed has been on this site for 50 years or more. And I can't read that, but who was it that? Famicon. Thank you very much for the follow. Also you, Paul Pape, as well. I've just seen that come in as well. There we go. That shed's been on this site for about 50 years. It won't be there for much longer. It starts to get taken down next week and it's going to get replaced. And what it's going to get replaced with is another one looking exactly the same, but a bit bigger. Now what will maybe interest you in saying about that new shed is inside there is going to be a torch and glass and some glass working going on inside there. That's where it's going to be. But it's a sentimental shed. That shed has been, as I say, it's been here for so long that I've just decided immortalise it. Mr. Left Field, thank you very much for the follow. So there's yeah, so that's what it is. Pyrography, wood burning, using lots of tools like this. Everybody says wood burning. It's cooking. You cook the wood. If you ever had maple syrup, this is kind of like the same way, where you cook the sap of a tree, which goes nice golden colour, or whatever colour you like in maple syrup. This is kind of doing the same thing, only it sits on the surface and uses heat. So generally speaking, there are some people that use oxyacetylene torches for doing this, but they tend to use really big pieces of wood and they'll do it outside. But this is just one of the things that I do. I do all sorts of stuff. He says looking. Not that one. I do wood. Zoom! Thank you very much. Actually, what I was saying, because when somebody reminded me of my microphone, your name would really interest my wife because she collects pocket dragons. And there's a pocket dragon called Zoom. A little green dragon with wings that's supposed to live in pockets. One of them's called Zoom. I do all sorts of stuff. So I do carving. Since you're all raiding, I get to show off. This is a simple carving, but this is actually it's an eagle owl. Jeez, it's a big bird. It's about 3 feet tall. And this one was called Amber. So that's just put that light on, you'll see better. Not very much better, but a little better. So that's some wood carving is one of the things that I do on the stream. It's a variety stream, is this. I go through about 5 or 6 different crafts as I feel like it. What was that? X-ray specialist punk. Thank you very much. And I'll show you a couple of other things that we do around here, or I do around here. I say we, there's only me involved. I occasionally do some airbrush painting. So I happen to have an airbrush here because I'm painting a model, but airbrush painting. So I tried doing sort of some ghost-like images at one point. Is that going to light up on the camera? That's not very going to show up very well. But that was a, yeah, it's not showing up very well. That was a canal boat. Just like a ghost image, like in the fog. So I was just playing at one point with this, so that's a train. Lots of methods of transport involved in some of these things, like a plane. So all nighttime type stuff. I do like monochrome. And not so monochrome. It's a monorail from Disney World. That's an old one actually, that wasn't done on stream. That was one of the very first airbrush paintings I ever did. I've got a couple of, I also do something called scraper board. Scraper board is literally black board. It's black with white clay underneath. You scrape the black away and you get images. Or you get images if you're scraping the right way. This was of a cottage at night, because they make great things on the night. And I tried out for the first time using some ink, and this is the grass is very effective because of that. I'll show you the first scraper board image I ever did. I do a lot of these first time on stream. And that one there is a portrait of a singer on stage, of course. And this fellow is called John Miles. Now, you may not have heard of him, but he actually has had quite a few number ones in the past. When Tina Turner, if you've heard of Tina Turner, tours. He's a band leader and a lead guitarist, and also one of the songs that you may have heard of, because most people have, is a song called Music. When music is my first love, and it will be my last. He's the fellow that wrote it. That's John Miles. And then yeah, there's a leopard for you. How would you like seeing that come out of the night towards you? It's quite effective in the dark. And of course, when I first started doing scraper board, one of the things I had to do, it's an iconic image, and I've wanted to do it for a long time, and scraper board is one of the best ones for doing it. And that's the Earthrise. If you've ever seen the NASA images, that's one of the most famous images, and it's kind of my version of the same thing. It's not a copy of anything, it was just a moon surface, but that was one of the things. So you get to see a lot of stuff around here. There's not only things like carving and stuff like that as well, but this is kind of like a miniature rug. It's made the same way rugs are made, with a needle pushing thread through, but you can make images out of it as well as just rugs. This is a miniature rug from that particular perspective. Having said that, you don't have to do them in miniature. I do have a big one here, which I can't really show you all of it on stream, but this is a big rug. And this was done on stream as well. So you get to see all sorts of stuff. Diamond painting, glass engraving. Actually, I can show you some glass engraving. Which ones is it? It's those two. Okay, let me get the right two. I like coffee. Most people do, or lots of people do. So I kind of had a few jars. Now these are really difficult to show up, but I kind of felt like doing some underwater stuff. Mainly because my PC is painted. It's airbrushed with tropical fish on it. and I just felt like doing them on glass. So we've got an angelfish on this glass with a very nice bit of seaweed, and a seahorse on this side again. These work best if I can get something really black behind them. I've got something really black. No, I never have something really black when I want to show off one of these things. That's a bit better. There you go, there's a seahorse. But of course, this jar has a really good resemblance to something, which kind of begged me to do this one. Which I'm sure some of you recognise. I do have another one of this, which is coffee themed. Being a coffee jar, it seemed like a good idea. Which has got a Greek. It's got a beach on it with a palm tray, a Greek coffee table in a Greek cafe. It's got the word coffee down one side, and I've forgotten what's on the other side. Oh, it's a cup of coffee. Yeah, I know it was coffee themed. So I've got glass engraving, another thing that's done here. So you get to see a lot of stuff at the moment, though. Engraving is not engraving. Pyrography is what I'm up to at the moment. But one of the things I have a tendency to do whilst I'm streaming is if I start talking, I stop doing. So I could get some more stuff out, but I guess I should get on with what I'm actually here to do tonight, which is to do some of this. So what I wanted to ask though, Paul Pape Designs, is since you're doing the raiding, what have you been streaming tonight? That's assuming you're still here and haven't left. Yeah, I still have a live microphone, that does help. Have anybody else tell me what you were watching this evening? Right. Yeah, boards. Okay. Pyrography isn't necessarily as hard as it looks. There's 3 styles of pyrography. This is a style which is generally called photorealism. Not particularly because it's like a photograph, although sometimes they do look that way, especially with a good artist, because it looks like a sepia tone photograph to some extent. But the reason it's called sorry, I thought a cat just came in. The reason it's called photorealistic is because the shapes are all represented by colour. So, you know, like when you look at a photograph, if you look at a tree leaf or the edge of a shed, you can tell where the edge is because the colour stops. There's another style which is which is like a cartoon style, where you actually outline everything with a black line and then colour in the middle, usually fairly solid colour. And then there's a true black and white, which literally is it's black or it's white, there's nothing in between. They tend to be the 3 different styles that get used, so you'd have great big blocks of black. Sometimes they'll use some cross-hatching. I prefer this style. I just think it looks better. It's more challenging and more fun to do. For me. But it can be a quite slow art form because you're building up colour often in layers, and especially because with pyrography, as with quite a lot of art really, I suppose, that is, colours fool you. When you look at this board at the moment, you're seeing white around here, partly because the white balance of the camera isn't that good, but partly because you will look at things like this here and see it as black, therefore something that's next to it tends to be white. And when you're applying pyrography, you get fooled by that very easily. I'll do something on here and think that looks too dark, until I put something next to it and then no, that's too light, I've got to go over it again. So you often do it in multiple layers because of that, building up the colour fairly slowly. But also you get more depth of colour when you build it up slowly. If you go straight to black or whatever the colour is, it often looks kind of a bit flat, doesn't actually look as 3-dimensional as it can get. Hopefully that does look 3-dimensional. But anyway, right. he says. I'm still talking and not doing. So what I've got is some dark. This hut has been creosoted a long time ago. Wood preservative, very dark black wood preservative. Over the years, the rains washed it off. So the dark areas, some are sort of slightly shadowed because these boards overlap, but they're also dark because the rain hasn't washed that away. And I'm just trying to represent that. I'm not looking to get anything sort of a perfect 100% match to a photograph or anything like that. Very rarely do you need to do that. Not unless you're trying to get sort of, I don't know, a maybe some sort of you know, award from, you know, if you're trying to represent a bird or something like that. You probably want to get the colouring about right, or a portrait. You generally want to get it about right, but it is actually surprising, especially with portraits, how far off you can be, because as soon as somebody recognises it, whatever it is, then they overlook the stuff that doesn't match what they think it should look like. Which is quite amazing, really. That's how caricaturists work. As long as they pick up one particular bit that everybody recognises, then they see themselves, or you see your friend. This one, yeah, well, it's an electrically driven pen. I'm not going to touch that end because it's hot, but if I unplug this end, so the pens are replaceable. Replaceable? They are replaceable, but you can swap them. So I've got a few here. They just plug into the end. This particular machine is a razor tip. I'm in the UK. There ain't a lot of them around that are fairly decent. Razor tip isn't bad. There are some which are better than others. And it just literally just plugs in. It's mains driven, but it operates at a low voltage, so I'm quite happy doing that. In fact, it might just light a torch bulb if I'm lucky. I think it's 1.5 volts. So it might have a problem with the torch, but 1.5 volts, but is enough to heat one of these tools. They come in all sorts of different shapes. I've got just 5 here. I've got another couple around, but these represent most of what I'm happy with. So we got what they call a shader, a round shader, because it's round. Shader because it's flat, and you use it generally for shading on large areas. Something called a spoon shader. Oh, a spoon shader. It's called a spoon shader because the tip is spoon shaped. But more the reason is it's kind of like the bottom of a ball on the bottom. It makes it easier when you're trying to, if you're not experienced, especially when you're trying to fill in an area, with it being sort of rounded, it's easier to get a smooth fill with a spoon shader. Got a knife here, and yes, it is turned off. So there's a relatively sharp edge on it. It's not razor sharp, but it is sharp, and when it's heated you can actually carve with this. So you can use it for carving things like gourds. You can actually carve wood. So often people who do small birds or carve small birds will use pyrographic tools, and they'll use a knife blade like this. It actually will cut quite well into wood. I've got here a writing tip. It's very good for doing lines, but it's a bit like a calligraphy pen, in that you've got a wide side, if you like, and a smooth side. So you can actually write with this. You can do fairly thick lines with it. And then there's this one here, which is also a round shader. It's round because it's got a round tip. This one's just wider, it's bigger, so it covers a slightly more larger area than the one I showed you in this one here. But this one, the different shapes help you do different things at times. So this one's kind of my favourite pen. I use that more than anything, but this one's not bad. These are replaceable tip pens. I don't actually care for them that much. I prefer fixed tip pens like this. The reason being, you lose heat in these connectors here, because although they're tight, there is a resistance between the wire and the connector, and so you lose. This warms up, you lose heat from the tip there, but it makes it cheaper. Unfortunately, in the UK with razor tip, whilst the razor tip do sell quite a range of pens, and all of their pens are available as fixed tips, either thin like this or a thicker one, which they call a heavy duty pen. The importers in the UK have a limited number of them, so if you want fixed tips, you tend to have to actually, I think they're in Canada, order them from the States or from Canada and arrive. The machine itself, just to show you the machine, I'll just tip the camera rather than, hopefully it's there. Lighting terrible, but this is a dual machine. Main power switch. This switch just controls which pen it is that I use. There's two cords here that are plugged in, and the main temperature setting, which is different for every pen. So it's set on 4.5 at the moment, which is for this pen. If I plugged the writing tip in, this well, it wouldn't quite glow at that setting, but it would be too hot to do most things. I'd be getting sort of burn lines and cut lines in it. So you very quickly learn the right sort of temperatures to work at with these pens. You can get pyrographic tools that look like a soldering iron, if you're familiar with soldering irons. They tend, well, you can do this sort of art with those sorts of pens. They tend to be UK £15–20. That would be what, about $20–30. Usually the more expensive ones come with tips, different tips that you have to unscrew and screw in, so they can be a bit sort of awkward to work with, especially when they're hot, of course. And you're supposed to let it go cool before changing the tip, so if you want to change the tip, come back in an hour. But they're very good if you want to do things just like branding or embossing type work, where you just want like to stamp, let's say, a leaf shape around something or stuff like that. But you can do this sort of work with that as well. Just these machines are easier if you are ordering them from the States. So another one to look at is it Coleridge? Can't remember now. And I suspect that's somebody who's just taken a look at the shop. So yeah, it's Coleridge. I think it's Coleridge. It's a very similar machine, except the connectors the other way around. That one's another one with a whole range of pens, and they get very good reviews as well. Hello, Insane. Yeah. What was it you liked? I'll have a look later, but I'm guessing you either favorited the shop or an item. That's another thing that's done on stream that Insane's just taking a look at is chainmail. I'm still not doing, am I? So there's a couple of chainmail bracelets, but there's necklaces, earrings, ankle rings, ankle chains on there as well, in different colours. This is silver coloured. This is sterling silver, but I don't sell sterling silver. Technically I can, but I can't. I can sell you sterling silver as long as I don't call it sterling silver, because it has to be hallmarked if I sell it as sterling silver, and I can't afford to hallmark bracelets. It's £50 a time to hallmark anything. So all sorts of different metals. This is aluminium, stainless steel, niobium, titanium, and they have different colours and things like that. Some really nice stuff. yeah, the why not sterling silver is because it's actually illegal in the UK to sell a finished item because it's jewellery. Because it's a precious metal, it's called jewellery. It's illegal to sell an item which is jewellery containing a precious metal, in this case sterling silver, and describe it as the precious metal. So I can't describe this as sterling silver unless it's been hallmarked. It actually has to weigh more, for sterling silver it has to weigh more than 6.7 grams, which this does. But if it was gold, any gold at all, it has to be hallmarked. In the UK, the assay offices do the hallmarking. It's £50. Anytime you send something to them, it's £50. Plus then a fee for each item that they hallmark. They test the metal and provide it meets the specifications for sterling silver, gold, whatever the precious metal is, then they'll actually stamp or engrave your hallmark. It's a personal hallmark onto the item. But they, as I say, they charge £50 every time you send them something, and then a per item fee. So could you imagine a bracelet which may be sort of only 20 or 30 pounds then becomes 70, 80, 90 pounds just because of the hallmarking. So but the aluminium, and this is a sterling silver clasp, that's okay because it doesn't weigh more than 6.7 grams. Can't put a gold one on because then it has to be hallmarked. Oh, I've got to say it's not gold. It's weird. I can sell you sterling silver, but I have to describe it as a silver coloured metal, and that's kind of pointless really, because then you've got to trust that I'm selling you what I say I'm selling you, because it's more expensive metal than the aluminium. But to be honest, I think the aluminium looks as nice because it stays silver. Of course, sterling silver tarnishes. There are all sorts of colours available, as Insane's probably seen, but it's just some of the aluminium colours. You see, I'm talking, I'm not doing again. But here's the normal sort of colour range. So we've got silver, we've got a white, which is kind of like a matte silver. That's a pale green, although this camera's terrible for colour representation. This is described as yellow. That's what you'd more think of as gold in that colour. I've got a pale blue there. This colour, this colour is stream blue. It's a funny one. It's purple. If anybody's ever seen Cadbury's chocolate, the wrapper, the purple of the wrapper, that's the same colour. But this camera always shows it up as blue. Anybody with a Logitech camera has the same problem. I can get it sometimes, and I need really bright lights to do it. But it's a purple colour. We've then cheers Rose, thank you very much for the follow. This is an orangey sort of colour. We've got a light purple. So that's a light version of that. We've then got, this is a bronzy sort of colour. That's more of a brassy, they actually describe that as gold, but brassy sort of gold. Pink. God, that's not showing up very well at all. This is actually blue, green, red. That's a brown. That's what they describe as a gunmetal. It's kind of a dark silver, and then black. So there's 16. Actually, there's another one that's not in here, which is called dark rose. But it's there's a heck of a lot of, you can get a lot of combinations out of there. Some of the bracelets, like this one, which clearly has sort of two sides to it really. You can sort of do red and green, or sort of purple and yellow. You've got a choice. You can make all sorts of colours up, or you can do bands, so you can make blocks of colour. Is it? I mean, I've just picked up a necklace here, but I mean, you can also combine colours just by two different things. This is a bracelet with not a bracelet; it's a necklace with a pendant. So the silver necklace with a gold pendant on the bottom. So a fairly simple design, but it's quite a nice sort of thing. And the rings come in different sizes as well. So this is in different weaves. By using two different sizes of rings, you can get sort of, this is what they call a box chain, but you can either make it rectangular as this is, or you can make it square. Different weaves. This is a half Persian, this is a full Persian, so this is more rounded, that's more flat, as you can see. And the rings even come in little tiny rings. So this which then gets called micro mail, and this is an example of a micro mail bracelet. I've forgotten how many rings that's in here. There's something like 1,000 rings in that. Each one was individually opened and closed and woven by me, and this thing is soft. You can tie knots in it. It's like fluid. It's cloth, and I kind of love playing with this sort of thing. But there's something like about 20 to 30 hours to make that, just because of the number of tiny rings. Do the same thing with sort of the 1/4 inch rings like are on here, and it takes a couple of hours. So there's chainmail has got a heck of a lot. There's tens of thousands of designs as well that you can make things with. I also do stuff with beads as well. And not just this is bead weaving, I guess. So this is a spiral chain. Sorry, a spiral bead bracelet in blue, mainly blue and red. There's some black and the odd white bead in there as well to provide an accent. So, and there's if you've had a look, as Insane has on the site. I also do ribbon type bracelets which can have a pattern on it, and I think the one that's on there at the moment shows poppies. This is an easy one actually. It's like the chainmail to some extent. Once you get the pattern going, it's easy. I would say that I'd do it, wouldn't I? But I know when I first tried to do one of these spiral ones, if you don't was it something like 3 beads, 4 beads, and then you loop back, come back through the first 3 and so on. It takes a bit of getting used to, I must admit, but once you've got the pattern set in your mind, it becomes quite easy, and it builds really quite nicely and fast. I enjoy doing those. There's quite a few. I mean, that's an easy sort of technique. I've got another. I've got another one that she's just on a wire here. This is done. This is what they call peyote stitch. It's a tube. Now that one is awkward to do, and it's time consuming. Just to get to that size. And then it's just on a simple wire with a loop. But yeah, they take. It's fun to do. I enjoy doing them. They do eat time very easily though. And of course, you don't have to just work with one or the other. So there's chainmail and some beads there. And all of the jewellery making, sorry. Legally, it's what they call imitation jewellery because it doesn't contain precious metal. So a jeweller works with precious metal and precious stones. which is what a lapidary, yeah, lapidary, somebody who cuts stones. They make jewellery. I make imitation jewellery because it doesn't contain the precious stones and metals. It's amazing what you end up having to find out when you start working with this sort of stuff. But I started because I was actually watching somebody on Twitch making chainmail, and I bought some. I found it fascinating watching him, and he helped me to the, if you like, so with finding a couple of kits to start with, so I could make them, and they became a birthday present for my wife, Lady Zara, and I enjoyed making them so much I just carried on. I like to see that insane. By the way, I did see a message a while ago, but they're fun. They're fun things to do. They take time, as I mentioned, but actually, what I want to do is switch bends. I want to just use this knife blade, because what I want to do is put some marks into this wood here where the wood is splitting. Now I want to use it. I normally use the other tool for doing lines like this, but I actually want to use this one because it is actually cutting into the wood slightly, and that kind of gives me a very slightly three-dimensional look. Daft as it sounds, this is a knife blade. The shader, if I turn the shader over and use it that way, I can get finer lines than I can with a knife blade, and that is just purely because the knife blade, it sinks in and then it cooks either side of it, and it actually comes out as a fatter line. But just purely because this is because the cracks are sort of deep, I am actually using that effect of them cutting in because they're cutting in. I don't want to do much with it, as I say, just a lot of times this is just sort of representative. And that's just about all I want to do with that. Switch over and heat this up a bit more. And then, so this is very much like you might draw with a pencil to some extent. There's just a couple of things you have to remember, especially if you're used to using a pencil, and that is you can't erase this stuff. Ish. Essentially, if you think of never being able to erase, then you can't go. I was about to say you can't go wrong. You can go wrong, but you won't ruin what you're working on. You can't take an eraser to this. The best you can do is to scrape it off using sandpaper or a knife blade, and sometimes that's part of the art form. If I'm doing a cat, for example, whiskers, I'll often use a blade to do the white whiskers. But I can't take an eraser, and I can rub as hard as I like, that's not coming off. So you have to scrape it or use sandpaper. But if you do either of those things, and you try and apply pyrography over the top of it again, because the wood surface is different to what's around it, it stands out like a sore thumb. So you really don't want to erase it if you can avoid it. And even so much as if you put a piece of sellotape on here and lift it off, that disrupts the surface enough that it will stand out. Sometimes that's a useful effect. I could maybe put like a piece of tape the shape of a window and then take it off. Doesn't leave any residue as such, but it's disrupted the surface, and it will give me a slightly sort of milky sort of look. which sometimes is good for windows. But if you ever make a mistake, generally speaking, the best thing to do is to disguise it. The usual sort of mistake you make with pyrography is it's too dark. You know, you've created a blob usually, or it literally is just too dark. Your tool was too hot. I mean, one thing you have to be careful of with almost any tool is it loses heat when it's on the wood. It gains heat when it's off the wood like this. Now the temperature setting, it really is not actually reading the temperature. It's controlling the amount of electricity flowing through the tip, and so it will only get as hot as the amount of electricity flowing through it will allow. But if you put it down on wood, the tip cools down and it doesn't then cook the wood to quite the same degree as it did as soon as you put it down. And so what you often find is, whilst it's hanging about in the air here, this tip is heating up. If I put it down, I'll get a dark mark the instant it touches down, which is sometimes what you want. Often it's not. It's a blob, as it often gets called. And a couple of the ways you avoid that is you either have another piece of wood to the side of you, which you just run the tool on for a couple of seconds before you come back to your work, or you blow on it. And that's just enough to cool it off so that when you touch it down you don't get that dark blob. And then from there you can then build up the colour, let the heat soak into the wood. The amount of colour that you get depends on, well, it's a quantity of heat. So if I want something dark, I need to supply a large quantity of heat. I can do that in one of two ways. I can use a hot tool, or I can use a cooler tool but apply it for longer. So if I want this to go dark, I can slow down and it will go darker because I'm applying more heat to that one area in the time. Without changing the temperature, I can come over here and get really light colours, as I'm doing here, and this is probably won't show up on camera as such, but I'm getting a really light colour. And that is because I'm not in one place for very long, so the amount of heat, the quantity of heat, is very little, just enough just to start to change the colour of the wood. Which is why artists using the soldering iron style can get this sort of work. They just work faster in the lighter areas and slower in the cooler areas, in the darker areas. Although there's such a lot of heat in those big tools, they have to work really fast sometimes. I actually don't like them, those sorts of tools, not because of anything other than it's a bit like trying to draw, holding a pencil back here. If you can draw like this, you may be okay with one of those larger tools. I tend to hold my pencil down here, so that's why I like these tools. I can get a lot closer and use it more like a pencil, especially if I use the pencil tip. Now often usually when you're trying to do this sort of thing, you have to really smooth colour gradients. Because this shed is weathered, I'm kind of not all that bothered about being really smooth about it, which is kind of ironic. Usually I'm literally the sort of thing where I spend ages trying to get really smooth colours. Like if I'm doing a portrait, for example, obviously you want the face to be nice and smooth, you don't want blotches on it. On here, precisely the opposite. I'm not bothered by it. How much do these things run? I've had this one now. I've now had this one for what, it must be about 10 years. So It's a bit difficult to say. I mean, the pens are running into 20 to 30 pounds, which is roughly the same in euros at the moment. Insane. The machine itself, I think, was about 160 pounds. For me, that's worth it. But I literally don't know what they are. This one is, if you want to look it up, is a razor tip SSD10. Yeah, I mean, for what you can do is you can find as well. Actually, you might find them more available in Europe. So look locally. Insane. Before you move. I did find quite a few sort of in sort of Italy. I don't know about the Netherlands, but sort of Italy and Germany were selling them with a larger range of tips as well. When I was looking, this was a long time ago. So it might be worth you looking before you move, if you're at all interested. That is. And I was about to say they tend to sell a machine with 2 or 3 tips, so you sort of get a better deal out of it from that as well. Yeah, razor tipper in the UK, 230 volts, which is the same as in Europe. You just the plugs are different plugs, aren't they? But yeah, this one is rated 220 to 240. So as long as you don't get the American one, which is 110. The whole of Europe, I think, now is effectively 230 volts. UK is 240, but it's they fiddle it to make it the same. Oh, sorry. If you want to no, that's a hangover, to be honest. A long time. You know what? Well, I don't know how long you've been broadcasting on in creative. You know what it was like when it first started. Oh, okay. Now they've gone up a bit then, but yeah, that's that's a. They're selling you there. They're selling you there. This I think this pen body with the interchangeable tips. But yeah, I'd say the single tip machine. Literally, the only difference between the single and the double here is the switch and an extra socket. It's almost not worth it. The two. It's nice having them there just to switch between them, but you've seen how easy it is to switch a pen. So the single or the double. I would guess if you were doing it a heck of a lot, then having sort of 2 pens plugged in becomes convenient. But it is only just convenience. There's nothing. It's not like there's 2 separate controls for the pens, with different heat settings or as like that. It literally is it's the same as plugging and unplugging a pen, except it's done on a switch. Try and get the heavy duty cords, by the way, if you're using them, and the heavy duty pens if you're intending to use them for quite a while. They're just slightly cooler than the smaller ones, and the heavy duty cords are a little bit thicker, which again just help keep the heat on the tip rather than heating up things like cords. Heat actually is kind of your enemy with this. It sounds daft, but you are actually working quite close to the tip, and the fixed tips are slightly closer still. I'll use this because it's cold. If you're using a tip kind of like this, heat generally isn't a problem. You do get some coming up the barrel here, and it does get warm. After several hours it maybe gets slightly uncomfortable, but that's about it. If you however use a pen like this, and I often do it because I want to use the sharp edge of the tool, then the heat comes straight up onto your thumb and first finger, and at that point, after a few minutes you feel it. It becomes uncomfortable. You don't get burnt, but it's hot enough to go, you know what, I've had enough of that. So you get that sort of slight sticking effect, but it's not actually burnt you. I thought you'd been in the Netherlands a while. That is true, yes. Although have you made marbles, or you done any blowing tube? I've done a little bit now, as you know, and I know you get used to the hot glass, but I must admit I was really surprised at just how cool that 1500 degree torch is. How close you can get to it and you're not feeling it. I felt the heat when I got the marble, and it's of course the marble that's radiating the heat. Or when I blew the bauble, heat the tube okay, not a problem. As soon as I tip it down like that, in fact I with this one I sort of blew it horizontally, so vertically, because soon as I turned this vertically and I got that under my fingers, boy was that hot coming off of this thing. And the more you blow it, the hotter it gets, because the bigger object, and it was kind of like, I've got to stop this now. So second attempt was blowing it up here instead of down there. Yeah, I thought you'd been there. Yeah, for a while. You moved. Yeah, you said you were moving to Nottingham, about an hour and a half south of me. You'll be go. Oh, well, I'm assuming you'll be doing all the Robin Hood stuff while at shows and things. The heat went straight up. Yeah. 15,000 degree heat goes straight up. Yes, you quickly learn. You quickly learn. And of course, I was working with Boro as well, so that needs to be hot. There seems to be a lot of shows. With it being sort of Sherwood Forest, there seems to be a lot of folk type shows down there. We don't get as many around here. I'm up in sort of Yorkshire, so you're okay. Yorkshiremen war with Lancashire, not Nottingham, so you're all right. Tend to be more farm shows and that sort of crafts sort of thing up here. Of course, you've got the Great Yorkshire Show, but yeah, maybe. Yeah. I've never been. It's like everything else to some extent. When you're in the country, there's quite a few places around here to visit, and it's kind of like I've never been. Okay. Give me a chance to get on with a little bit of this stuff. Yeah, so if you ever do make a mistake, which is getting stuff too dark, usually the only way you fix it is by not fixing it and disguising it. So if I had ended up with something with a dark mark down here on this particular thing here, so if I got, I'm just going to do something like, if I end up with a dark mark here like that, and I didn't really want that, I intend it to be nice and light, then one way around it is to disguise it. So I could go, you know what, that's a knot of wood, so I can sort of put sort of a rings around it, if you like, a couple of marks around it, just to, I'm not sure quite how well that's showing up, but I can apply pyrography around it in sort of a ring shape. I'm making sure I get a few sort of lines in there just to sort of make it look like a knot in the wood. Disguise what I've done, so that it's a mistake, but it just, you know, you hide it in the picture. The other way of doing it, let me sort of pull something out here as well like that, is, okay, I didn't want that. Well, okay, the way I get rid of that, if I'm not going to disguise it, is I actually make everything else around it the same colour. So I'm going to darken this down and down and down. So if I intended this area to be light, well, I've just made it darker. Well, that kind of, you might think at first, well, that kind of exaggerates the problem, you know, making it worse. But what you do with that is, by making everything else, if I make this area here around it darker, then what I will probably end up having to do is to make this line, which is like a shadow edge, even darker still. So I darken that down, which is what I've just done there, and you can actually see it's got darker. Because that's darker, this now looks less dark, which probably means that I've made that darker. Well, that probably means this area here is a bit more lighter than it needs to be, than it wants to be now compared to this. So I then have to darken this down. And if I darken that down, and I want this area above it to be seen as darker than the bit I've just done, I then have to darken that down, and so on. And it ripples out. Generally speaking though, what you'll do is you'll fade the difference a little bit, so I won't make it quite as dark, and by the time I've got more than about an inch away, I've kind of got back to the colour scheme I was working with to start with. But that's essentially the only way you can really fix something that's in there. The other way is just to leave it there and not tell anybody, and see if anybody sees it, because 90% of the people don't see them. And that's a made-up statistic, by the way, but most people that I've come across don't see the mistakes. They look at something like that and they see what you intended them to see, which is the shed. They don't go going, but that's a bit darker down there. Well, hey, great, you're the one person in 1,000 that's seen it. Well done. Everybody else, you just ignore it. So that's another way of doing it, is to just ignore the mistake. And of course it comes with practice. Is both fixing it and actually not making it in the first place. So what was I was working on this board up here. So pyrography is kind of forgiving and not forgiving at the same time. But if you work as I'm doing here on a relatively, I'll say a relatively low heat, it's probably a couple of 100 degrees, you're able to work fairly slowly and make sure you're sort of placing things, you know, line marks where you want them to be placed. You're not going to get things, you know, darker unless you want them to be darker. And that helps a lot. But you can also learn different techniques for how to work with the pen as well. The blobs come because you put the pen down and don't immediately move it. A lot of heat gets dumped into the area really quickly, and then as soon as you start moving, you're reducing the amount of heat. So one of the tricks is in airbrushing technique, where you land the plane, as it gets called. You're moving, you touch down while still moving, and you lift off. You don't get a blob that way, because the pen is in movement. It's never still in one place for very long. So it's one of techniques like that you can sort of learn to help you get the sort of effect that you're after. What I'm going to do is exaggerate this black around here, and then this board should suddenly look like it's sat on top. Just like that. And that board, that one should now look like it's now sat on top of that one. Rather than like these two, they just look like they're butted up against each other. Now you can actually see one overlaps the other. A little bit of colour sometimes makes a big difference. Another trick is, especially when you do animal fur, for example, is to remember the lines. So animal fur, for example, fur always moves in the same direction. It always lays in the same direction. It generally on cats, for example, it starts from about here in the middle of the nose and radiates out from there all the way over the face, all the way over the body, all the way to the tip of the tail. So it's kind of like that's the front, and the tip of the tail's the end. And the fur always comes out from that particular position. So when you are doing pyrography of an animal, for example, you always move the pen in the direction of the fur, because that way, as you're moving the pen, you are getting marks. Even when you're trying really hard to get a really smooth colour, you'll still get what gets called tooling marks. And if they're in the line of the fur, it doesn't look odd. If, however, the wrong angle to the fur, it stands out as being not right, and sometimes it's not obvious as to what's wrong, but it just doesn't look right, and other times it just looks silly. And these are the sorts of things that you learn. Here I'm doing wood planks, so I'm making sure I'm following the angle of the plank, so that any sort of mark that I get, and unfortunately the camera won't pick it up, but I have got tooling marks here, slightly darker lines, where I've just been a little bit slow or not quite as smooth as I want it to be. But because they're in the line of the plank, they will tend to look like wood grain, and it will look right. If I'd gone the other way, it might not be as good. I can cheat in some respects, because a couple of these planks I've actually got saw marks on. If I look at the real hut, so I've got semicircular marks on it. So I kind of could do that occasionally, but you can only do that a little bit, otherwise it still doesn't look right. But yes, what I was trying to do here is there's sort of it's a couple of boards where there is a really prominent ring structure in it, which is where a branch was at some point, obviously, in the past. And this is one of the boards. So, as I mentioned earlier, what I'm looking to try and do, just with the odd thing, is put in the odd marks that you recognise. And if you're familiar with this, which I am, you're not, but I am, I kind of see those every time I walk past it. And if I put them on there, then it becomes recognisably my hut, not just a hut. And as I mentioned earlier, it's same with portraits and things like that. Portraits, actually, it's usually the eyes that are the most telling. I have a tendency to do eyes first. If I don't get the eyes right, even with cats, which is another one I do quite a lot of, but even if I do with cats, if you don't get the eyes right, you might as well throw the piece away and start again. It's one of the key things. So I often start with the eyes just because I don't waste much work then if I get it wrong. And excuse me leaning across the camera, just remembered I've got this other one here. This was a memorial plaque for a cat. And of course the eyes. One of the tricks with eyes is you've got to have the pupils both looking at, well, both pointing in the same direction. Unless of course you've got a cat where they actually do look in different directions, but if they don't look in the same direction it does tend to look a little bit odd. I'll just put that back over there. So I've got some rings in here, so let's just darken this area down here. I do tend to work detail as I'm going along. Other people work different ways. There's no particular right or wrong way. A lot of people who do painting often will leave the detail until a lot later on. Pyrography is less of an issue for doing detail. I mean, with painting, it's so you can get the large areas of colour in, and any sort of colour mixing is more controlled, where two colours come together and things like that. It's less of an issue when you're working with monochrome and with pyrography. I kind of do it as the feeling takes me. If I'm working on something I want to do the detail, I'll do it. The details do tend to stay there for most of the time. Occasionally, like here, I've done some light, some rings. If I darken this down enough, they will disappear, and I'll have to reapply them. But I have been able to do that, and if I can just touch them up if I need to do so. So, unlike painting, you can do detail with pyrography at any time. I tend to do it, but often I will have to darken it or change the colour, as I mentioned earlier, just because I didn't pick the right colour to start with. You're always sort of working one colour against another. I'm looking at this here and saying, well, actually this wants to be lighter than this area here. That probably means I want to apply, actually I'm working in the wrong place, but I might want to come back over here and darken this down because this is going to be darker than this. So you're always working this area against that area as you go all the way across the image. Remembering things like light direction, so this end is lighter than this end, so I've got to get darker as I go across there. I can only go so far. That black is about as black as I can get. And very rarely do you leave any wood uncovered. Uncovered is the lightest colour, the whitest you can get. Now these are white window frames, but they're not pure white. You have a shadow, for example, across here. It's still white, you recognise it as white, but there's a shadow, and it may be a subtle shadow. And if you actually want to represent the 3D shape, then you don't leave it all blank. You've got to come in and put some sort of colouring in, and it can be very difficult to hit really subtle colour changes sometimes, so you do often exaggerate the colours that you're using, but you very rarely leave anything actually white. Okay, let's add the black in there. So I'm not turning the tool up, I'm just leaving it in place for a lot longer. Generally speaking, you very rarely stop with a pyrography tool. It's usually always moving. Sometimes it's just moving really slowly. And there we've got another one that's just popped out. And again, I'm not leaving this all white, so what I'm going to do is just put a very light colour in. Camera wise, so unfortunately you can't see it, I don't think. You might just see a very slight colour shift. And I may come back and adjust that later. This particular board is altogether darker. Because this one is going quite a bit darker, what I'm doing is just slowing down a little bit. And I'm getting a darker colour because of that. It just saves me a little bit of time. I'm still going to do multiple layers of colour on this, but just by doing it, slowing down a little bit, I can get closer in the first pass. So I just sort of put a sort of a knot in there, just again to give the board a little bit more interest than just a plain colour. I find it funny in that when you're learning pyrography, that one of the hardest things is to get a nice consistent smooth colour across an area. You often practice quite a lot to try and get that, and then the trick, as you get better, the trick becomes sometimes not to be as consistent. Like this wood board, I don't want a consistent colour. I actually want it patchy, and it's quite hard to get that sort of effect, because I'm so used to trying to make things really one sort of smooth colour that I have got to try hard not to do that. Now it's way too light, but I've got a nice sort of colour in there. So this is actually, it's a colour distribution, a pattern in there. Now this is one of the things now where if I apply a nice smooth colour over all of it, all I end up doing is darkening everything down. So a darker bit will get darker still, a light bit will go a bit darker, but the contrast between the two still exists. So it's kind of like the colours move down together. So I can apply a smooth colour over all of it, and it all just goes darker together, including sort of the pattern that I've sort of, or the I'll say pattern, but the sort of pattern I've established, the sort of texture is the word I was looking for. Okay, that'll do for the minute. I probably want to do more in there and make it darker, but again, let's just pop this board out. There. That's okay, Insane. Yeah, never been. I've been to Nottingham quite a few times, Nottingham area, but I've never been to the Robin. I've never seen the forest, never seen the trees. Maybe it'd be something I'll come down, especially if you're going to be showing stuff down there. Then maybe I'll have to come down someday and see it. Only trouble is, it has to be almost a day trip because we've got cats, and putting them into a cat hotel is quite expensive. Okay, actually showing or just at the festival? I say showing, selling. Oh yes, you've got cats, haven't you? Yes. What have you? What do you have? We've currently got 4. We've got 3 male cats and 1 female cat. So they're all effectively rescue cats. Felix was a rescue cat. He actually came from a rescue centre. Junior is a feral, or was a feral cat. He moved in. It took 2 years for him to actually move in, and probably another couple of years before you could even really stroke him. Now I can pick him up and throw him over my shoulder. A couple of years ago I wouldn't have dared do that. He's got a lot of mellow just recently. We've got Theo, he's a kitten. He's about a year old now. He's a ginger kitten, and again he was kind of rescued from a house that I understand that probably would have done something to him, along with Emmy, who's the female cat. They're not related, but those two were living in a house where they probably wouldn't have survived. So all of our cats have been. I've had quite a few over the years now. You've got 2, and your man has 1. Ah, okay, that's 3. You'll be getting a passport for them, will you? Or have a passport for them to bring them over? If you want to say any particular reason why you're coming over to the UK, having been over there now for such a long time, or you just fancy a change of country? Oh, that's a pity. Sorry to have heard that. Always sad when they go. They're part of the family. Misty's a nice name. Sounds like a grey cat, does Misty. Makes me think of a smoky grey. Ow! Black and white, nothing like it. Okay. Yeah. Oh, I see. Yeah. I see. Oh well, Felix is the typical Felix. Black with white. Although he's actually brown. He's a real dark brown. Junior is black with white markings, same as Felix. In fact, sometimes it can be difficult to tell them apart if they're not looking at you. Emmy is the tortoise, black and grey tortoise shell, and Theo, of course, is ginger. The ginger tortoise shell. Theo's a bit like a baby though. You can pick him, surprisingly not around, you pick him up, turn him over, he'll lay upside down in your arms. Oh, Finn's a new one. Okay. He's 2. It's probably about the same. He's not far off, similar to Theo then, because I think it's October, November. Theo will be 2 years old. Oh, and Jasper. Okay. I'm actually surprised none of them have been around tonight. They're probably still out. We do lock them in on an evening because we have foxes living around here. But Theo tends to wander in, and so does Emmy from time to time. They do appear on stream. I generally pick one or other of them up when they come in. This board is quite dark, and I've got to get from there down to a sort of a light colour, so these boards are gradually sort of slightly lighter as they come down. This is where I now go back over and lay a second layer of colour over the top. It's not exactly as though the layers are transparent, and you just put in another layer of the top.
I couldn't find any linked video skills that can play that.
That's one of those Home Assistants just perked up for no apparent reason. She does that from time to time. Actually, no, I hadn't, to be honest. Oh, I see. No, I hadn't heard you talking about it. I've only watched you once, I think, Insane. In fact, I can't remember when you said you were broadcasting. I was kind of looked out, kept looking to see if you were broadcasting all for the past couple of days. Because I work from home. Unfortunately, this isn't my day job. I'd love it. Well, I don't know whether I'd love it or not, but I work from home, and so one of the things I often do is I'll put a stream on whilst I'm working, because I prefer a background noise of some kind. Not that I'm saying you're a background noise, but it does help me concentrate if there's something going on, and I get to listen to streams at the same time, and you know, from time to time I can look up and see what's happening. So I do often have a stream running unless I'm really concentrating on something, and then it gets switched off. But which is why I can't usually chat at the same time, because I'm busy, supposed to be working. Sometimes I get a bit impatient with this, and I'll turn the heat up a little bit. You see, you remember better than I do, and you were right, it is a couple of times. I think one was in the evening, wasn't it? One during the day. I'm not quite sure. But yes, your memory is better than mine. And of course, the 2 days I go looking is the 2 days that you have off. Yeah. So when you move, I hope you've got a good internet connection over here. I'm sure you've already checked. Actually, impatience with pyrography sometimes can be the undoing. I do sometimes get impatient. I want it's not going dark enough, quick enough, and I do sometimes get frustrated with it because of that. So I do turn the heat up. I have to remember to work faster if I do that, and sometimes it's proven to be a mistake. Other times it's okay. Really depends on how much practice I've had in the short term. If I've not done pyrography for a little while, then I do have to just wind back and be a little bit more patient, because it takes a little while just to get back into it. I mean, the last pyrography I did before starting this was probably about 6 months ago. So. Oh, that's not bad. That's not bad. I often end up looking, you'll see when I'm broadcasting, I often look over there. The reason I'm looking over there is because that's where the streaming computer is. It's away from my workbench, and I've got a monitor over there which is showing the picture I'm putting out. But when I look at this, I'm often too close to it. I can't see it. If I'm not working on camera, what I will often do is just step back about 6 feet. A lot of what I do looks better at a distance. The bigger the distance, the better. But the camera, for some reason, the view that you're seeing it is roughly about the same image I'd see if I did take a couple of steps backwards, and I can get a better overall view of it. So you'll often see me looking that way just to have a look at the camera. But I have just seen it is now 9:25. That's a bit it's a bit late now for me. I'd normally go for broadcast for a couple of hours, Monday, Wednesday and Friday. From 7 PM UK time, it's 1800 hours GMT. I tend to stop around about 9 o'clock, but with you guys here, I've gone on a bit longer. But it's about time I had a cup of tea and put things away for the evening. So I will be back on Friday. Yes, I think so. I was trying to think if there was anything happening on Friday. Should be back at Friday, 7 PM. Carry on with doing this. If anybody who's watching would like to see some of the earlier bits of this, I think there's still a couple of videos here on Twitch. You can also see them on YouTube, youtube.com/Zaragonart. And in fact, just about all the history of broadcasting is on there, so you can see almost the very first ones. When I was less less experienced of being on camera, but there's all sorts of pyrography on there, there's carving on there, there's as I mentioned, the scraper board is on there, the punchcraft, jewellery making, all sorts of stuff. I've made a helicopter, started a 3D printer on there. Oh, what else? I don't know. Whatever happens on the stream. Recently we've been making a remote control model truck. I've been making it on stream. It's due to be finished shortly when the painting's completed. Not painting it on stream just because when you've painted one thing, painting the next thing is just it gets a bit boring even for me while I'm painting. So unfortunately I'm going to close the stream for this evening. Thank you for all the raiders and Insane. Thank you for dropping in. I shall be looking out for your stream tomorrow and watching in the background whilst I'm getting on with other things. And I will say cheers for now. Hope to see any and all of you on Friday. Bye for now. And we're muted.